We are in the midst of Parshat Bo, where the Jewish people, of course, go free from Egypt. And part of when they go free from Egypt, one of the things that's told to the Jewish people is that they need to go and get the wealth of Egypt. Daber na ba'oznei ha'am in chapter 11, Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Bet. Speak now, God tells Moshe to the people, Vishalu ishmeit reu vishameit ruta klei chesef uchlei zahav. Tell the people to go to the Egyptians and gather from amongst them gold and silver. We talked about yesterday the restraint during Makat Choshech. Right, we could have expected the Egyptians. They couldn't move. There was paralysis. The darkness, and the Jews could have gone and looted and taken everything, but they didn't loot. They showed a great sense of restraint against these Egyptians who had harmed them now for might have been close to 2 centuries, enslaving them, etc. And here, though, they say it's time for some back pay. You need to give us gold and silver. You need to give us wealth in order for us to create a type of society. Need to have in Kemach, in Torah. If there's no money, there's no Torah, there's no instruction, there's no. So they go around and they ask the Egyptians for gold and silver. And there's an interesting midrash that Moshe is sort of perplexed by this. Why do I have to tell them to do this? And God says to Moshe, I said to Avram, I made a brit with Avram that the Jewish people would be afflicted in a land that was not theirs for 400 years. And Avram's going to say to me, you afflicted them. They were strangers. They were foreigners. Their lives were difficult. And you didn't even fulfill the idea, the promise that they would leave at least with a certain amount of wealth. So they need to go and they need to ask the Egyptians for gold and silver. It's a discussion that's quoted from the Gemara Masechet Brachot, that's why Bnei Israel, God says to Moshe, they have to do this. They need to go and collect this. And what that question, part of the reason I brought that up, is that it gets into sort of a larger question about this. We know that we're going to have, of course, the 10th Makkah and the 10th Makkah later on in the Parsha Makkah Bechorot. It talks about from the Pharaoh's home all the way to the homes of the slave, there was death of the firstborn. The death, it was in every single house. There was Sa'aka Gedola, there was screaming in Egypt, Asher Ein Kamahu, like there was not ever a time. All of Egypt was punished in the plagues. And of course, difficulty with that is many things. One of the questions that's difficult about it is, hold on, if God said the Jewish people are going to be afflicted, they're going to be strangers and afflicted in Egypt, then the Egyptians, in a sense, do not have any. It's already been destined. It's already been said that it's going to happen. The divine foreknowledge said that it was going to. I'm sorry, everybody. I somehow lost you. I hit a wrong button on my phone when I got a phone call in. My apologies. So, right, this is a classic question that's asked about divine foreknowledge. How is it that you can say the Egyptians, why were they suffering? And there are a number of different answers to the question. We'll just review some of the answers, sort of like mainstream philosophical answers that God predicts that oppression will happen. God does not force who is going to do it, how far they're going to go. It's like the book, is it Daniel Goldhagen, I believe, Hitler's Willing Executioners. Yes, Israel would be enslaved, but Egypt chose to be that group that enslaved them. It wasn't destined per se. Also, how far did it go? They'll be strangers in a strange land. They'll be afflicted. What does the word afflict mean? We know, let's say in halacha, we have the idea of inoi, the same word that's used for Yom Kippur. We don't eat, we don't drink, but Does it mean we're going to kill the firstborn children? We're going to dehumanize the Jewish people. We're going to enslave them and torture them. And so Egypt sort of radicalizes and pushes the suffering. So there are a number of answers sort of related in that sort of way, Egyptians' brutality, and and I guess, what's intriguing about it is that we do have instances of Egyptians who defy Pharaoh, most notably Pharaoh's daughter. The Jewish babies are supposed to be killed in the Nile River, and she sees a child and she says, Mialdei Vrimzeh. She knows that that is a Hebrew child, and yet she rescues him. Yes, she names him Moshe, which the Torah says, Min Amayim Mishitihu, I drew him out from the water, but it also could be related the word Moses, like Ramses. You hear Ramses and Moses. Moses is related to a word in Egyptian that means the son of. So she may have named him my son, right? S-O-N, not S-U-N, saying this is my child. It's not like a child of the Hebrews, but she has Rahmanut. She has a great sense of kindness. We also talked about the possibility of maybe the midwives were Egyptians. It wasn't clear. So there are people who stand up to Pharaoh, who don't listen to his decrees, who don't join in. But yet the majority are the willing executioners. The majority are that, right? They follow in with Pharaoh's plans, with Pharaoh's destruction of the Jewish people, with Pharaoh's killing of them. And so the average Egyptian person, the question of divine foreknowledge doesn't seem to be a very, very strong question, because yes, this is going to happen. But who's going to be the person that gets it done? And it's a question that generally is sort of discussed. If you think that God has, there are, we most of us live our lives like the Rambam says that we have free will, but there's many a Jewish, more than mystical camp thinker who believes we don't really have free will. That we are, God is the puppeteer and we are all puppets and we're just sort of doing that which is told to us. But a lot of them think of it on a grand scale, meaning, is God determined if I'm going to eat a sandwich for lunch or eat, I don't know, a salad for lunch? Probably not. That might be my free will. But the large things that happen to the world, the large things that happen to the Jewish people, those things are going to happen. But the question is, who's going to make them happen? How are things going to occur? God controls, God knows the way that the world is moving. And then who is going to be the executioner? Who's going to be the person that brings about this horrors? Who's going to be the person that brings about the greatness? That is determined by our by our free will. So there are different ways of understanding. Let me just go back a few other, questions and related issues to this. So again, part of the question here is this idea of collective responsibility. Moshe is not going to an Egyptian, slave master and saying, can your slaves go free? He's going to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the one who's making the decision. At a certain point in time, we've seen his Chartumim, his advisors, the magician, his sorcerers have said to him, Etzba Elohimi, that's the finger of God. We can't do that. Later on, they say to him in the beginning of Parshat Bo, Avda Mitzrayim, Egypt is lost, we're destroyed, just let them go. And Pharaoh, at first on his own, and then through the hardening of his heart by God, the removal of his free will, Pharaoh is not letting them go free. And so there is this sense of collective responsibility. But Egypt wasn't just ruled by a tyrant, it was a slave civilization. You need to have Egyptian households owning Israelite slaves. You need to have them being part of the slave, right? Being part of the entire network and industry, being willing to force the slaves, being willing to punish the slaves and beat the slaves. So yes, it might have been Pharaoh on top who was making the big decision, but every home is benefiting from the suffering of Bnei Israel. And so everybody is going to suffer as a result. There's no getting out. Now, maybe the daughter of Pharaoh, she didn't suffer. Maybe they were Egyptian women who saved the Jewish babies, as one interpretation we gave weeks back was maybe they didn't suffer, God promised them houses, it said, so maybe they did not suffer, but generally the Egyptians did suffer. Now, why the firstborn, if we're sort of moving ahead towards the 10th plague, the firstborn represent the future. In Egyptian society, the firstborn inherited the land. They preserved the caste system, right? It allows for the continuation of the religious and the political identity. So it's not just about the first son, but it's about breaking the Egyptian future. God isn't only ending the oppression of the Jewish people, he's ending the society of Egypt and its reproduction and going on. The plague is not just about the difference between B'ni Bechori Yisrael, Israel is my firstborn, and the Egyptian firstborn, but it's an attack on the mechanism of the historical continuity of their empire. It's the breaking of their wheel of destruction. We spoke about, I think, in the last couple of days, and maybe we'll speak about some more. We'll certainly speak about some more over the our many lessons on mitzvot and different things. But so much of the Torah is the laws of the Torah as opposed to the laws of Egypt. Egypt is the civilization that is an immoral, broken civilization. And the laws of the Torah, many of them are a contrast to Egyptian civilization, right? The most obvious one I think we mentioned, right? Look at the way the migrants, the wanderers, the Jews, the strangers are treated in Egypt. And that's why over and over again in the Torah it says, "V'ahavtem et hager." You have to love the ger. Lo tonu et hager. Don't oppress the stranger. We have to break the wheel. We have to break the entire society. We have to break the entire frame and the way that the Egyptian civilization, what it stands for, and then we can create our own Jewish civilization, Israelite Bnei Yisrael civilization, which the laws are in many ways the opposite of the way the laws were um, in Egypt. And one last thing, and I think that this is an important notion. We know this is an important notion. Is maybe many of the Egyptians didn't actually serve as slave masters. Maybe they didn't beat the slaves. Maybe at times they were even decent with the slaves. But we know something that they did. They were silent. And we've heard this from Martin Luther King, and we heard this from Elie Wiesel, and we heard it from Hannah Arendt and many, many others, that the only reason that cruelty can exist, I can't say the only reason, but cruelty can exist because of silence. And so many Egyptians might not have enslaved the Jews directly. And many of them didn't maybe drown the babies, but they didn't protest. They didn't stand outside. They didn't scream. They didn't try to hide the Jewish babies, right? When going back to Moshe's parents, the unnamed woman from the tribe of Levi and the man from the tribe of Levi who hide their baby for 3 months, but then can't hide the baby anymore. The baby is crying. Well, why can't they bring it and hide it in the home of an Egyptian? We don't see that. The Egyptians remain silent. Neutrality, when you face radical injustice and enslavement, is culpable itself. And we know that that's something that is very, very significant and very important and has been discussed, certainly about the Shoah, about the Holocaust by Elie Wiesel, and like we said, and many, many others, that silence is not okay. And it goes back, of course, to early on. Talked about this last week with the plague of blood.